All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody, to the Storm Seminar. We're going to be talking today about advancing stormwater capture for greener schools in Los Angeles. I have some folks with me today from Pacific Institute and Second Nature. And I am just going to go ahead and, I guess I should do some housekeeping before we get started. There is a Q&A box. Feel free to throw questions in there at any time. We will have time for questions and answers at the end, in which you will also have an opportunity to raise your hand, and we can call on you at that point, or again, put your question in the question and answer box, and we will get to your questions as we receive them. So I will go ahead and get started. So before we talk to the Pacific Institute, I want to talk a little bit about storms. For those of you who might not know who we are, what we do here at the State Water Board. Storms was developed in 2016. It's a clever acronym for the Strategy to Optimize Resource Management of Stormwater. We started to lead the evolution of stormwater management in California and advance the perspective that stormwater is a valuable resource. So, as many of you know, I'm sure, historically, water management in California has been divided and compartmentalized into many different interests between water quality, water supply, flood management. And those interests are governed by a variety of state, county, and local agencies. And so, since stormwater hits all of those, it can often be perceived as a source of pollutants and a major contributor to water quality impairments. If you look on the right-hand side of this slide, we're talking about population growth, climate change, water shortages. And so those put together are really increasing pressure on the state to take action and manage water resources more effectively. And so these challenges between the interests on the left and the changes on the right, they really represent an opportunity to redefine how California utilizes and values stormwater as a resource. And that's where storms comes into play. In 2016, when the Storms Unit was created to implement the strategy, there were 23 projects for us to implement over 14 years, and we are smack dab in the middle of that process. The Storms group, the Storm strategy identified four major goals. One is to change the perspective that stormwater is a waste or hazard and treat it as a valuable water resource. Two, manage stormwater to preserve watershed processes and achieve desired water quality and environmental outcomes. Three, implement efficient and effective regulatory programs. And four, to collaborate to solve water quality and pollutant problems with an array of regulatory and non-regulatory approaches. So, since we're here to talk about stormwater capture and use today, I wanted to talk a little bit about what Storms has done as far as capture and use projects so far. We've done a bunch of projects, but I'm going to highlight four here that we've developed over the last 9 years that are very much related to stormwater capture and use. If you go to that website that's listed on the bottom of the screen, you can get there also by going to our homepage and clicking on the publications tab. All of these reports are located on the Storms website. But we developed a couple investigative reports. First off, one was to identify and eliminate barriers to stormwater capture and use. And the second one was to identify funding for capture and use projects. And those reports were developed in collaboration with the California Stormwater Quality Association and also Sacramento State Office of Water Programs, and really looked into potential solutions to these barriers that include funding and other regulatory and other barriers. We developed a guidance for stormwater and dry weather runoff capture at school, which kind of goes along very well with what the Pacific Institute's going to be talking about today. That was in collaboration with the state architect, the Office of Water Programs at Sac State, and the California Department of Education. And it was really kind of a start to recommend best design and use practices for stormwater and dry weather runoff capture. It kind of provided insights for selection, design, and implementation of practices to reduce runoff and pollutants that flow from school properties through green infrastructure and minimizing impervious surfaces. Lastly, on here, in collaboration with the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, or SWRCB, we looked at potential methods to quantify stormwater capture. And this was really an important first step as we continue down this road to develop a method for smaller municipalities to kind of figure out their own stormwater capture potential and also how much stormwater they're actually capturing. Along that same note, we developed a story map, which I encourage all of you to take a look at here. If you click on that QR code or take a picture of that QR code, it'll take you there. Also, the link is at the bottom of the page here, but it's a kind of story map in plain language to really encourage the public to get interested and to understand why stormwater is important and the importance of managing stormwater as a resource. We hope that folks can use it as a tool when they're talking to maybe city council members or folks, decision makers that potentially might be able to provide funding for stormwater projects. So what's next for storms? I showed some projects that we've worked on, and we're kind of doing a reevaluation of storms. We want to make sure that the future projects are aligned to fit with the original storm strategy while also taking into account climate change, droughts, and the continued aridification of California. And so we have been guided by the California's water supply strategy that came out a couple years ago to support local stormwater capture projects in cities and towns with the goal to increase annual supply capacity by at least 250,000 acre feet by 2030 and 500,000 acre feet by 2040. And so how are we doing that? Like I said, we're kind of reevaluating storms and trying to refocus our efforts on capture and use projects. We're exploring public-private partnerships, encouraging urban stormwater infiltration, and looking into stormwater crediting systems to encourage these partnerships and incentives. And so how do we do that? We're going through a process right now, like I said, of a reevaluation of storms and a narrowing of our focus, but pretty soon we're going to be going through all of these filters and gathering stakeholder input and kind of mixing that along with the previous project outcomes, the original stormwater strategy, the water supply strategy, and talking to regional boards. And from that, we hope to identify a new series of projects that we can work on to really push the idea that stormwater is a resource and get more capture and use projects. And then we filter that through finally our board priorities. And we hope by this time next year to be having a new slate of storms projects that we're working on. So for more information, I encourage you to check out our website. That link is there. You can sign up for our email distribution list there. Also email us at any time. And with that, I'm done with my portion of the presentation, and I'm going to pass it off to the Pacific Institute here to talk about specifically what we're here to talk about today. So evaluating the potential for stormwater capture and use on school grounds in LA County. Just want to take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda. Well, thank you all for being here today. We're here to talk to you today about a project that we completed and published last year around looking at the stormwater capture potential on schools, public schools in LA County. Next slide, please. So just a quick agenda for the presentation today. We're going to go over some background, and then we're going to talk about our approach, move into findings and recommendations, and then we'll have questions at the end. Please feel free to drop any questions that come up along the way in the chat, and we'll answer them as we go, or we'll keep them for the end. But just so that no one loses that train of thought, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Next slide, please. So just a quick introduction to your speakers today. My name is Sonali Abraham. I'm a senior research specialist at the Pacific Institute. We also have my colleague Shannon Spurlock, who is our senior engagement specialist at the Pacific Institute. And then we also have Dr. Catherine Raymaki, the research director at Second Nature. I'm going to pass it along to Catherine and then Shannon as we go along in the presentation. And then I think we can get started with the actual meat that everyone's here for. So I'm probably preaching to the choir to most of you here. So forgive me, but I did want to set some context around kind of school greening, the multiple benefits of school greening, and why we even embarked on this project in the first place. So we all sort of know that, green space is inherently providing benefits, not just for us, but for the environment around us and the community around us as well. In schools, however, we're seeing, although, schools provide this enriching, safe environment for children to learn and grow. But urban schools, particularly those serving under-resourced communities, are often covered in asphalt and offer very little actual green space. Greening of schools, which is like the intentionally incorporating green space into school campuses and stormwater capture, the directed management of stormwater is a really key way to do this. Can really both minimize asphalt, but also prioritize a natural environment, creating a whole host of benefits for the students, for the teachers, for folks around the schools as they provide community spaces often, as well as the environment. So that's through, water supply benefits, water quality benefits, recreational and social and mental well-being benefits, and also lower temperatures, reduce neighborhood flooding. I could go on. It's a whole presentation on its own, the benefits of school grading. And yeah, so we came into this project sort of knowing this and trying to fill that gap between understanding the benefits of school grading, but also understanding that schools don't offer a lot of these while they serve one of the most vulnerable sections of our population. Next slide, please. So in this project specifically, we focused on LA County. LA is the most populated county in the United States. It's got a really large public school system, 80 school districts over serving 1.3 million elementary through high school students. In previous research, we also found that it generates the largest volume of stormwater runoff of any urban area in the American West and is one of the highest in the United States as well. So we saw a real opportunity to kind of marry these two pieces and see that LA County schools really have an opportunity to create new learning environments for students, while at the same time improving both community and regional climate resilience. We also found that, schools in LA have historically been criticized for having a lack of green space, intensely hot temperatures, a lot of asphalt. We heard from a lot of community groups on the ground that there is a gap in understanding to really get a number and a understanding of what the opportunity for stormwater capture is in this space. And so we really see stormwater capture as a tool for increasing school greening, and understanding what that opportunity is allows community-based organizations to take that information and then advocate for more greening on schools. Next slide, please. So our project team for this project was us at the Pacific Institute. We led the project and we facilitated it and did the research, but we had our key technical collaborator, Second Nature, and you'll hear from them later on, that really provided the methodology for how we did this research. And then we worked closely with the Council for Watershed Health and the Trust for Public Land Los Angeles, who were our community voices and helped us to understand and shape what was happening on the ground so that we're able to shape our research to respond to that directly. Next slide, please. And yeah, next slide as well. So we had two key facets to our approach. We did a ton of stakeholder engagement, and then we had our technical analysis. So within the stakeholder engagement, we really embarked on this to ensure that our research resonated with on-the-ground needs and goals in LA, There's a lot of excellent work already happening in LA by community-based organizations to implement school greening projects. And our goal was for our research to really speak to those groups and create a resource for them to be able to use. And so in order to do this, we ensured that we engaged with community-based organizations, LA-based NGO coalitions, the County Flood District, the State Water Board, um, and the LA Unified School District, and some smaller school districts as well, to really understand what was happening on the ground, to understand the big picture landscape of school greening, and ensure that any project outcomes, the recommendations that you'll hear later on, were aligned with goals and needs of folks on the ground in LA. So we did this we had an advisory room through the project. We also conducted a host of one-on-one conversations as well as larger group discussions as well. And this engagement really shaped the direction of the research that you will hear about. Next slide, please. So the next piece is the technical analysis, and this is how we generated the numbers. And then for this piece of it, we worked with Second Nature, and they have a really awesome tool called Rain Steward. And we decided to use this tool in collaboration with them because it quantifies the volumetric potential for stormwater capture at an extremely highly resolved spatial scale. And it uses publicly available data sets to estimate co-benefits. And it allows you to estimate co-benefits. So it's a very multi-benefit view of stormwater capture, and it is able to use science and data to inform public policy and decision making, which is exactly what we want to do here. So with that, I will hand over to Catherine to explain the tool and kind of the thinking behind the numbers that form the core of this research. Catherine, over to you.
Thanks so much, Sonali. And it's a pleasure being here, and it's been a pleasure working with Pacific Institute on this. Second Nature really approached this collaboration with the same mission that we have for all of our work. And it is exactly what Sonali and Amanda before her said, which is, we really want to leverage digital tools to make stormwater science actionable and to actually see stormwater projects come to fruition. In our development of Rain Steward, one of the things that we recognized is that there is a lot of discussion around using stormwater projects to provide multi-benefits, but that concept can be fairly nebulous in practice, and the ideas often aren't really scalable. Analyzing one property and one benefit at a time really isn't feasible for an organization like the LA County Unified School District. You can see here on the slide, they've got over 1,000 acres of imperviousness. And if there's not a really structured way to quantify benefits and compare them across the campuses, and if you don't have quantitative goals for those multi-benefits, the result is that there are missed opportunities across the landscape that has huge implications for stormwater mitigation. So that's our hope with using Rain Steward, is that we can unlock some of that potential. We approached the development with some of the challenges that you see in mind on the screen. And that's true whether it's a school district with dozens or hundreds of properties, or in the case of LA, almost 2,000 properties in a region, or if it's a private company with developed land across the country. It's the same tool, the same concepts. So we first started by defining 4 key benefit areas, and that's illustrated in the image on the right by the 4 quadrants in what we call our benefit badge. Within each, and you can see here, we have water security or water supply, water quality, flood risk, excessive heat. Within each one of those benefit areas, we incorporated 3 or 4 data sets that capture the key variables that dictate the potential for a site to provide those benefits. Those then get combined into a score from 0 to 100, 100 being the highest potential for positive benefits of stormwater better managed in that area. What the user then sees is these scores, and they can determine whether any of the categories are more or less important. They can weight them accordingly, and then use that to identify the sites that should be further evaluated for the specific needs and the feasibility of doing projects there. Next slide. On the user side, all you need to do really is enter the property parcels, and that's what we did for the LA schools, is just enter in the boundaries of each of those school campuses. What Rain Steward does then is it calculates metrics like the amount of stormwater generated from the sites. It ranks the properties so that you can see which ones have the greatest potential benefits. And it allows you to build a plan with specific properties and their summarized key performance indicators. So on the user side, it's pretty simple. You just need some location information, and Rain Steward does the rest. Next slide, please. The output ends up looking like this. On the left is a list of the top 10 properties for the LA County schools. You can see teeny tiny on the left side, mini benefit badges, those 4 quadrants. Some of them have a center indicator indicating that they're in environmental justice areas. And then the rest of that table are key stats from those particular sites that help you get a really quick glimpse at what those potential projects would be all about. On the right side, then, is a fact sheet, and there's one of these for every single one of the 2,000 properties in here, auto created, giving even more detail about each site, from how much the anticipated stormwater mitigation might cost to what the impact might be, and then other things like what aquifer does it sit above. Basically things that you might end up paying an engineering firm thousands of dollars to produce, and it is made automatically. That, again, is meant to kind of address some of the barriers that we see holding back some of the action for these projects. Next slide. The last step here, in terms of the tool, would be to bundle the projects into a plan. And this is what that looks like for those top 10 properties that have been ranked by their multi-benefits. There's a dashboard that indicates the things like the anticipated cost, what kind of cost recovery you might get from grant programs, therefore what the total cost might be, what the expected impact is in terms of stormwater managed, how much impervious area would be treated, how much pollution mitigated, what's the cost per gallon. In the lower left, how these 10 properties compare with the overall portfolio of properties, hopefully on the higher end of opportunity for each one of our benefit categories. And last, these little pie chart, donut charts that show the impact or potential impact to environmental justice communities. All of this is information that you might need to provide for any stakeholders, whether that is potential funding agencies, county or school district leadership, the general public, anyone who you need buy-in to make sure that these projects actually move forward and you have the resources to help them move forward. I'll wrap up by saying that Rain Steward is not just a custom tool for these LA schools, but instead it's meant to be available for analysis for any land areas. That could be in a region or it could be across the country. We want to make sure that any water problems can be solved at scale. That's really important to my colleagues and me at Second Nature. Every campus across the country sits in a watershed, and it has the potential to improve stormwater management in that watershed. And so our goal with this tool is to help turn each individual parcel of land into larger scale, really impactful water stewardship. With that, I will turn it back to Pacific Institute.
Great. Thank you so much, Catherine. Next slide. So as Sonali and Catherine have both highlighted, there is an incredible opportunity for capturing stormwater on the grounds of LA public schools. And as you can see in this chart, there are just over 3 billion gallons a year generated. And of that, about 2 billion gallons can actually be captured for water supply purposes. So this amount that is potentially capturable can offset municipal demand and contribute to the greening of school grounds without increasing demand and putting additional pressure on regional and local supplies. And anyway, just a little editorial comment here to those who are with us today. I don't know how that number is sitting with you when you first heard it, but when this was one of our key findings that came out, we were surprised by the great opportunity in this space. Next slide, please. So in LAUSD, school campuses are distributed across 10 major watersheds. And you can see that in this graph, it's showing stormwater capture potential with the dark blue bar, the pollutant load treated in the light blue bar, and then that impervious area is highlighted with the yellow line. The stormwater capture potential and pollution prevention potential is highly variable across the various watersheds. And this variability is reflected in the difference in the number of schools per watershed and the amount of impervious area on campuses within each watershed. Next slide, please. So in this slide too, we want to highlight where some of the greatest potential kind of rose to the top. And one thing I want to underscore as we're talking about this is that Sonali really kind of highlighted an on-the-ground understanding and context is very important, understanding how each of these elements and multiple benefit opportunities are understood. But when we look here, we can see when we look at the multiple benefits that of stormwater captured to prioritize project on school campuses, we looked at the 4 key benefits that Catherine highlighted. Water supply, water quality, flood reduction, and urban heat mitigation. This map shows the top-ranked school campuses across LA County for each of those benefits evaluated. School campuses with the high potential for have a very high potential for providing multiple benefits with stormwater capture. They are clustered in the southern portion of LA County. These clusters are apparent for single benefits, as well as kind of when you look at the different weighting of those multiple benefits. These clusters are caused by factors like, or influenced by public supply aquifers, impaired water bodies, flood hazard areas, and the social vulnerability of the surrounding communities, again, highlighted kind of by that environmental justice demonstration on the badge that Catherine was highlighting. So with that, so we did this assessment in partnership with Second Nature, and we have these key findings where there's a massive amount of stormwater available for capture for water supply purposes on school grounds. And we worked with our partners and collaborators to understand what are key recommendations that can help unlock that benefit. And we have 4 key recommendations that came out of that report. Next slide, please. The first one is encouraging strategic partnership between community organizations and school districts. In this slide, we see a before and after image of Jackson Elementary. This school site was redeveloped with the in partnership with Amigos de los Rios and Jackson Elementary. And, you know, when I've shared this slide with colleagues in the water space, you know, one of them, I think, very pointedly said, which one would you want your child to go to? So here we see so many co-benefits and opportunities for learning and the physical environment for students, as well as stormwater management for the surrounding community. Next slide, please. So another recommendation, when we talk about co-benefits, there are always trade-offs, right? There are often a suite of co-benefits that can be achieved, but you often, because of a limitation of resources, need to really prioritize what will be the most impactful. And so looking at stormwater capture on school ground can enable a host of these benefits, but understanding which ones are priorities for the community is highly important. Working with students and school staff can help prioritize the elements, which ones are most meaningful for them, and ultimately create buy-in and ownership, and building in a value for the care and maintenance for this space at both the school and the community level. Next slide, please. And Sonali had this slide at the beginning, but, you know, and as she said, I think we're a little bit, we're preaching to our choir here, but it's worth highlighting that you can only achieve a multiple benefit outcomes when a multiple benefit lens is used in the planning and implementation of stormwater projects. So incorporating at the outset of these projects is key to, I would say, not only making the most of the available stormwater runoff at those sites, but also translating that into community benefits at each school site. Next slide, please. And then finally, you know, there's been an ongoing conversation about the role of schools and MS4 permits. Really, one of our key recommendations is this conversation is ongoing. It starts and stops and starts and stops, but schools can be ready for this and they can begin to implement best management practices and put themselves in a proactive space and prepare for new regulatory requirements. And so that is another way which will benefit the school long-term is and put them in a more proactive versus reactive space. So those are the 4 recommendations. I'll close out. We'll go back to the full group, but I will say, you know, I loved Amanda's introduction piece and talking about stormwater as a resource. And it is our hope that with the work that has been achieved through this report and through all of you, we can further socialize the idea of stormwater as a resource and make our communities as healthy and vibrant as they can be. And with that, the rest of the team is joining.
Great. Thank you, Shannon and Catherine and Sonali, for that amazing presentation. The work that you guys are doing is so exciting and interesting, and I love to hear about it. So I want to open it up to questions right now, and we've got plenty of time for questions and discussions from the audience. Feel free, like I said before, to type your question into the Q&A box, or raise your hand and we can take you off of mute and you can ask your question live. But I'm going to go ahead and start with this first one in the Q&A box right now. What trends in efficiency and I'm assuming costs do you see when comparing dispersed stormwater capture and reuse strategies versus centralized large-scale capture and reuse on a site? Do you folks from the Pacific Institute have thoughts on that? Or Second Nature, sorry.
Yeah, I'm probably going to redirect to Catherine to talk about how Rainsteward looks at it. But in general, we didn't look at centralized stormwater capture in this project, and I think what we were kind of looking at is how sites can manage stormwater. So more of a decentralized kind of view. And Catherine, do you want to say more about how the Rainsteward tool kind of looks at that?
Yeah, I can. And Rainsteward doesn't explicitly, you know, scale anticipated costs by the size of the project. However, as you're using it, you can improve the sort of data richness of how much you have for each site, and anticipated cost would be part of that. We do a fair amount of work with MS4s, and so we have some sense of that, particularly in terms of O&M, as well as just the implementation, that the regional projects are more efficient, cost-wise, right? They're not necessarily better for spreading out things like infiltration and green space, and making sure that urban heat is mitigated in lots of places as opposed to just one place. So, I think there's the literal costs, there's the capital costs, there's the O&M costs to consider. But on the other side of that ledger is the benefits, and finding that balance of what is it that any one program is trying to accomplish. I think that's pretty important. When it comes to schools, Sonali is exactly right. Like, these would be mostly decentralized, distributed BMPs that would be implemented on, a playground or a ball field, what have you. So for this particular project, we're mostly looking at small scale mitigation.
And I want to build on some of those co-benefits that come out of this. So, and this wasn't like a cost comparison between centralized versus decentralized. This is really just looking at the opportunity for stormwater capture on school grounds. And one of the things with the co-benefits that I didn't quite get into in the recommendations is about the art and science of valuing those, and what does it actually mean to have improved mental health and physical health at a school site, or to mitigate urban heat island effects. All of those have values too. So it's a practice of doing your best to get as close to apples as you can when you think about different strategies.
Right, thanks, you guys. I have a question. How long was your stakeholder engagement phase? And maybe speak a little bit to kind of what that was.
Yeah. Shannon, I can start, and then maybe I can hand over to you to fill in. We conducted stakeholder engagement throughout the process. So right from sort of when we started thinking about this project, it helped inform the actual research we did. So it shaped it right from, before we knew exactly what we were going to do, right to the end, to make sure the report was finally reviewed and edited by stakeholders as well. So I'd say, the whole process was about a year and some. We front loaded a lot of that stakeholder engagement. We spoke to a lot of community-based organizations in LA right at the onset, to understand what we were trying, who this research should speak to, and what sort of information we're trying to communicate. And then we also engaged with organizations while we were actually doing the research, to understand where our recommendations should be focused. And that was through an advisory group, as well as one-on-one discussions through the process. Shannon?
Yeah, I'll just say, and one element that was, I think, highly appreciated and informative for this process was, as Sonali alluded to, there are different types of stakeholders through it. And even as Sonali highlighted in the beginning of the presentation, so you have institutional stakeholders from LAUSD to community-based organizations that are partnering directly with schools, and that also work with the parent and family community that support that school. So they're also understanding the concerns and needs of that community. So it was, I would say, very multifaceted in that, and helped us do our best really to try to build out how we talked about opportunities for this work to be applied.
Next question. Can you talk more about how the costs are estimated within the tool?
Yeah, no problem. And maybe I can answer two down as well about
That
how
would be
the
great.
water quality benefits are calculated. Yeah, so the initial estimated costs, really, it's just a simple scaling for a certain amount of money per acre foot of stormwater mitigated. And uh, go back to what I was just saying about data richness, that can be refined as the properties kind of move through the planning, just as this is a whisper of a thought that we might do something here to, okay, we have full designs to do it. Those costs can be refined in the tool so you have more accuracy as you go along. So the first blush is just $1 million per acre foot. And from there that can be refined. You can override that default. In terms of the specific metrics, water quality is one that we think is really important. It's obviously really important for NPDES permits and TMDLs, as was recognized. So we don't use TMDLs, but we use 303D listing for the particular watershed that a property is in. So that is one of the metrics. And of course, you know that watersheds are nested. So depending on whether it's the finest resolution watershed that it's in versus just the bigger watershed system, that impacts one of the metrics that goes in.
Thank you. Let's stick with the funding questions. So we have one here about storms. Is Storms planning to make funding available to green schools in LA County? And as much as I wish we had money to give, the Storms program does not have any funding to give out. But I think maybe that next question, what are the major funding sources? Do you guys from Pacific Institute, have you looked into that, or I guess throughout this research that you guys did, do you have any thoughts on kind of what those funding sources for the schools is or could potentially be?
I can, Sonali, maybe we can tag team on this. So I'll say a big picture thought behind this project was that we could help create a document that would demonstrate, that would help schools make the case to apply for funding and be funding competitive. And that is something that actually, as far as that stakeholder engagement from the very beginning to the very end, that was always a goal, right? To put the evidence in the place into the hands of the people who can apply for funding and who work with their homegrown communities to actually understand what a green schoolyard or a green school would look like for that community. I do see that there is a question about the Safe Clean Water Program and Measure W. The way this was, this work actually built on some initial work we did, and I'll let maybe Sonali speak to this more, analyzing what was being funded under Measure W at the time. And so while we didn't analyze all the different funding sources that could support this, we went beyond Measure W and tried to make this report as applicable as it could be to different to communities, to go beyond Measure W and to think about maybe their community foundations, or I'm going to say like the CAL FIRE grants, or thinking about things like that. Sonali, do you want to?
Yeah, no, that was a great summary. I think, yeah, just to add to that, this work did come out of sort of understanding where Measure W funding was landing in the Safe Clean Water Program, and seeing that schools were sort of a gap there. And it was always intended to kind of make schools more competitive for funding. The interesting piece is that, there's some school projects can often be funded from within schools. However, there's a lot of competing priorities, and it's hard to kind of get this to come up. And I see that kind of covered in another question as well. So that there's kind of two pieces to it. One is kind of helping this research resonate with school districts and helping them kind of elevate this as a priority for funding. But there's also kind of allowing partner organizations in the community-based organizations in LA use this information in order to fundraise from, what Shannon talked about, whether it's state funding, local funding, foundations, philanthropic funding, different ways to kind of, so yeah, there's not one key. Measure W was one sort of like bucket that we can point to, but often it's a diversity of funding sources and the issues for why these projects are not uptaken as fast and as quickly as efficiently as they should be.
And I'll just add, I want to add one more piece that kind of came to mind as you were talking about that, Sonali. I think we all recognize that capacity is a huge issue at schools. They're trying to do so much already. And one of the recommendations also talks about engaging with community-based organizations. And so that was highlighted in Jackson Elementary, but looking at like in that engagement with Amigos de los Rios, like who was applying for the funding, that partnership helped the school expand their existing capacity and actually access more funding to actualize the community's vision for that school. So the recommendations also speak to helping schools tap into some of that funding and build some of their own capacity in that space.
I'll add one more thing, and that is that one of the aspects that we've heard again and again when we were developing Rain Steward was that cost recovery is really important to groups. And so in Rain Steward, when you drop your property location, one of the things in the fact sheet is what identified cost recovery programs are there. That doesn't mean that they necessarily all will apply, but there is the Measure W, there are turf to more natural landscape conversions, the implementation of rain gardens. Some local communities have that. Stormwater utility fees averted. Public schools maybe don't get charged the same things that you would then have cost recovery for, but nonetheless, I think that is a really important aspect of unlocking the ability to bring these projects to fruition.
Great, thanks. And I think along those same lines, I've got a question here about the kind of promoting the idea of school greening. So do you guys have any tips or resources to help convince school planning staff the benefits of school greening beyond what the tool that we've talked about?
Yeah, and I think what I'll end up doing is answering a couple, because I see a couple questions around how can your research guide better, but also what are the next research questions, and they kind of go hand in hand.
Perfect.
What we're understanding and learning as we finish this project, throughout this project, and as we think about next steps, is one of the pieces that makes implementation on school grounds difficult is, one, the competing priorities, but also the sort of competing decision-making tree in the school planning process. We're seeing that, often the directive for getting greening projects can come from the top, from a school board, but ultimately it's an on-site manager that has to implement it and sort of make that, and that's a facilities manager, an operations manager, whatever that is. And kind of a disconnect between these pieces is often a barrier to kind of actual uptake. There's also, because of these competing priorities, we're seeing a kind of lack of understanding, a basic understanding of connecting stormwater capture, school greening, but also connecting that with benefits to health and well-being of students, connection to cost. Actually, like to Catherine's point, the cost benefits that come from that. There's a lot of conversation about liability in a negative way, but there's, we're talking about mitigating a lot of like health accidents that could happen with asphalt by replacing it with green space, and kind of reframing school greening and stormwater capture in such a way that it is complementary to existing goals already happening at the school district and at the school level, and communicating it to school boards and school site staff in such a way that it resonates with them. So now that we sort of have this number and this quantitative understanding of stormwater potential on schools, our next goal is kind of like, how can we communicate that information in such a way that it is resonating with people on site and people at the higher decision making level. So that's understanding who are making those decisions, who are those key levers of change at these different pinch points, and then how can we communicate to them in such a way that they that this resonates with them. And that may be, you know, we're not talking about a gallons per year number. Maybe that is sort of a more ROI type thing, or maybe that is, you know, some key benefits quantified on a site level or on a regional level, whatever that is. But part of it is understanding what that information is, and how it should be communicated, and who are those exact people within the school decision-making process that needs that information. So it's a lot of competing priorities, a lot of people, and a lot of people with different people to answer to, which makes the process challenging. Shannon, so you just went off mute.
I did, and I'm going back and forth through. I want to add like a sentence or two more, but I'll just Sonali captured it so beautifully. And I guess that the one thing I want to like really pull out and highlight about what Sonali said is that the co-benefits from stormwater capture on school grounds can help meet the needs and challenges that schools are also facing. So they can be multi-solution solving. And so thinking about it in that broader way can help make that case. And Sonali presented some real examples in the LA area where kids weren't allowed to go outside because of heat, you know, so there are very real benefits to kids being able to take a break and be outside as part of their school day, because the environment has lower temperatures that are safe for them to be outside in. So.
Yeah. Great answers. Thanks, you guys. Kind of along those same lines, this first question here, and I think you answered it, but maybe speak to this a little bit more. Do you see Rain Steward operating more as a co-benefit tool that adds value to a primary objective, or is it truly enabling a multi-benefit planning approach where multiple outcomes are pursued equally from the outset? And I think maybe you answered that, but if there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, I'll just add that really what we see the benefit of Rain Steward is helping groups get over the barriers. And Amanda, you said this at the beginning, that we want to identify and overcome the barriers to actually implementing these projects. And so that's the main goal. Let's take LA Unified School District as an example. 1,888 properties. That's what we put into the tool. There's no way that the school district could do an engineering analysis of all of those. So they need a way to prioritize which ones might be the first to look at. And that's really what Rain Steward does. If the goal is strictly water supply, that's great. You can weight that benefit to only be considered in the ranking of the properties. You can also weight them equally or prioritize a different benefit. So that's up to the user to do. And there are a few metrics that come out that kind of speak to what the value is of that benefit. But you know, what we have tried to do is get enough sophistication that Rain Steward's capturing real dynamics that people care about without continuing to pass on complexity that doesn't actually help make the projects come to reality.
Right. So looking forward then, we've got a great question here about climate change. Was flood prone areas, was that looked at in the tool? And then also, can we bring that maybe to have it as a higher priority, or how can we really kind of think about climate change as we're developing these schools and prioritizing these schools?
Yeah, I can answer in a technical area, which is flood reduction is one of those 4 quadrants. And so that's explicitly something that we think is important. I think the question is about future flood hazards, and that is something that we built in of what's the expected extreme pattern, the pattern of extreme rainfall. We also factored in the setting using FEMA floodplain data. So, it's some combination of what's its location, how stormy is the weather now, how stormy is the weather in the future expected to be. And yeah, if that's something that is important, that can be weighted accordingly.
Yeah, just adding to Catherine's piece. Yeah, and we did. So in the report, you can see kind of the flood using just flood reduction as the weighting, kind of the schools that rise to the top for that. But also, first off, thank you, Drew. Drew, provided a lot of input during the project process from Council for Watershed Health. So appreciate the question. Another piece, just once we know sort of if we have a entity that is interested in prioritizing flood reduction, and we're able to use the tool to kind of say that these are the schools that rise to the top based on this benefit, or this benefit that we want to, this risk that we want to mitigate. We then can marry that with stormwater strategies that we already know can help in flood reduction. And so it's an easy thing to kind of put together. And so, yeah, just to say that this tool and this kind of analysis can really help can help you choose what risks and what benefits you do want to focus on, and then use that information to then choose strategies and choose practices that will address those specific risks, whether it's flood, whether it's heat, whether it's just added more green space, whatever it is. There's an opportunity kind of to marry those two pieces and create something really powerful.
Great, thanks. I think, we have 2 minutes. Do you guys want to, I'm not sure that we have time to talk about, these are all really great questions, but I'm not sure we have time to get into any of those. I think with that, I think I'm going to stop unless you guys have any last words you want to add?
What's the best? I see we had one question about sharing the report. Can I just put that in the chat so that
Yeah,
everyone
can... yeah, I was just about to do that. I can throw it in the chat.
Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah, of course. So I put a link to the report in the chat. We can also post these slides online, and we will post a recording of this webinar online as well. We'll send out an email. The Storms team will send out an email when that's been posted to all the attendees and also our email blast list. But if anybody has specific questions, I'm sure you can reach out to the folks at the Pacific Institute, Second Nature, myself at Storms. We'd be happy to continue this conversation. I want to thank everybody who has come today to listen and participate in this webinar. This has been super, super interesting. I learned a lot. We've had some really great questions. I want to thank Pacific Institute and Second Nature for being here today. Thank you all so much for getting the word out and the hard work that you guys do. This has just been fantastic. So thanks again to everybody, and have a great rest of your day.